Hello, everybody, and welcome to part 2 of the course, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. Last week, we part 1, where we went over the general ideas of what does Yiddishkeit, what does the Torah tell us about suffering, about pain, about good and evil in Hashem's world. And today, we're going to dive a lot deeper into exactly what that means and how to interpret that into our daily lives. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Rabbi Friedman to address us on the topic of why do bad things happen to good people.
Welcome back. To sum up what we talked about last week, the world is a difficult world because of the way it was created. And when painful things, tragic things happen, we need to treat them like we do natural disasters or natural illness. So, for example, polio, tuberculosis, we found cures. We fought it, found a cure, and practically eliminated it. Now we're looking for a cure for cancer. So the fact that cancer exists doesn't depress us, it doesn't shock us, it puts us to work. Find the cure. Fight it. Defeat it. In fact, Torah says that Adam and Chava were placed in the Garden of Eden to be fruitful, multiply, fill the world, and conquer it, which means fix it. Get rid of the bad and bring out the good. So when these things happen, our reaction should be, if this is my job, then let's do it. So every time we refuse to get depressed, every time we strengthen our faith and our trust and don't allow pain or tragedy to defeat us, then we defeat it. So it's not like we suffer silently and for no purpose. Every time we overcome, we fix the world. And that means that the pain, the tragedies become softer, become more easy to dismiss, and eventually will be completely removed. So we spoke about why bad things happen, and we're saying that it's a world that is lacking in godliness, and therefore bad things are part of the nature of this world. But now let's examine it a little more closely and give a more precise definition to what is bad. What are bad things? Now, the reason we ask that, rather than saying, why is there pain, is because the word bad has a very particular, definite meaning. And it's only that disturbs us so deeply that we must find an answer. What exactly do we mean by bad? Is all pain bad? Not by definition, not necessarily. Is all tragedy bad? An old man passes away. It's tragic, it's sad. It's not bad. We don't really expect to live forever. We got used to the idea of mortality. So we don't call all death bad. Wrongful death, that upsets us. That's bad. Not all pain is bad, but senseless pain, oh, that's terrible. Like, for example, labor pain is not bad, but false labor pain, not good. So wrongful death, false labor pain, an operation, when performed properly and on the right patient, is not bad. But if it's performed improperly or on the wrong patient, That's bad. So what do we have from this? The proper definition, when we use the word bad, we are implying something that happened that should not have happened. So what makes it bad? It shouldn't have happened. In other words, it is wrong. It shouldn't be. Now that disturbs us terribly, because not only is the event itself disturbing, but what it suggests. If this can happen when it shouldn't happen, well, what else can happen? Then anything can happen. Then there is no rhyme or reason, there is no plan, there is no judge, there is no justice. The world is a jungle. That we cannot tolerate. That goes against the grain. A human being is orderly and purposeful, and when the world doesn't follow a purpose and doesn't seem to be orderly, we can't handle this. So, what is the worst thing that makes us crazy, that makes us depressed? Senselessness. If things happen for no reason, that disturbs us most deeply. When we know what to expect, we can handle almost anything. But if things can happen that shouldn't happen, that's really disturbing. And religiously, in terms of our belief in one God, it is also disturbing that something can happen that shouldn't, because who's making it happen? Since there's only one God, if it's meant to happen, then it happens. If it's not meant to happen, then who's making it happen? It's almost like suggesting that there are two gods, the good God and the bad God, the big God and the little God. So if something wasn't meant to happen, how could it happen? So it threatens not only our stability, our sense of security in the world, it also threatens our faith. Is there really one God? Well, then what is he doing? Is he good or is he not? So, if we're using the definition, bad means that which should not happen. Here we have two considerations. Number one, how are we supposed to know what should or shouldn't happen? I play a game of baseball and my team loses. Oh, it shouldn't have happened. Shouldn't have happened. That's because I like to win. But really, cosmically, it shouldn't have happened. So anything I don't like, anything I don't want, anything I don't enjoy shouldn't happen. But you see, there are two teams. If I win, then their loss shouldn't have happened. If they win, my loss shouldn't have happened. So how do we know what should or shouldn't be? Since we don't have the information, we don't have the evidence, we don't have the history, we don't know what came before, and we don't know what's coming down the pike. So can we accurately describe any event as bad and state with any clarity, with any authority, this should not have happened? How often have we had the experience of something that happened and we were sure it shouldn't have happened? We were sure it was the worst thing ever. Worst day of my life. And then a few days later, a few weeks later, sometimes even a few hours later, everything changes and we realize, oh, that was pretty good. It was actually a good thing that happened. And it should have happened. So before we decide what should not have happened, we need a lot more information, which we don't have. And number two, and this is really essential, anything that should not happen cannot happen. Because nothing moves, Nothing shakes, nothing turns, nothing happens unless there's an instruction. Let there be. Let it happen. Everything happens by divine plan, which means everything happens when it's told to happen by the Creator, who is the only mover and shaker in the world. To even think that something can happen without God is idolatry. It's implying that there is a creator, that there is a master to the universe, not with a capital M, with a small m. But there is another master to the universe who is mischievous, and he makes things happen that shouldn't happen. And it displeases God. This is Greek mythology. Nothing happens if it shouldn't. Or, to put it more positively, nothing happens unless it should. And only because it should does God make it happen. And if he makes it happen, then it should. So what does it mean it shouldn't have happened? It means it was not part of God's plan? Well, then where did it come from? The devil? So there is no such thing as bad in God's world, because it can't. It can't happen. Either something is meant to be or it isn't. It can't come out of nowhere. So do bad things happen to good people? No. Bad things don't happen even to bad people. Bad things don't happen. Do painful things happen? Yes. There's pain in the world. Do tragic things happen? Yes. Are there things to grieve about? Yes. Grief is real? Absolutely. But bad? Let's consider another thing. If we were to be open to the idea that bad things could happen, which means things that shouldn't happen, happen. If you were open to that idea, what would it do to our respect for life, sanctity of life? If people could die when they shouldn't, where is the sanctity of life? Where is the significance of a person, of a human being, of their lives, if it can be snuffed out for no reason? If they can die when they shouldn't? So it's in fact disrespectful to life itself, not only to the Creator. So to think that someone I loved and somebody I cherished and somebody who was precious to me died when they shouldn't have died, their death was unnecessary and meaningless, that would make me crazy. So, in conclusion, the thing that really destroys us, beyond pain, beyond grief, destruction, the things that destroy us are the assumptions or the conviction that what had happened was not supposed to happen. Because then all bets are off, the rug is pulled out from under our feet, we have no way of predicting what's coming next, and we can't live like that. So, in all humility, we have to recognize that not only is God running the world and nobody else, and therefore bad things can't happen, but also, what do we know? How do we presume to define things as bad, as shouldn't have happened, when we have no access to information? So a guy puts his daughter on a plane, teenage daughter, and she's afraid. She hasn't flown before. She's nervous. And she tells her father on the way to the airport that she doesn't want to go. But the father, being a responsible parent, calms her fears, assures her that flying is safer than driving, and he puts her on the plane. That same flight, a guy got bumped off because it was overbooked. And he desperately needed to be in LA. The flight was to LA. He had a huge business deal pending. He had to be there. And they offered him a seat on the next flight, and they offered him money, but he needed to be in LA before the meeting was over. Could not get on the flight. So the father who put his daughter on the flight felt really proud of himself. He did good. The guy who couldn't get on the flight was beside himself. This is a disaster. This is going to cost him a fortune. He was angry. He was cursing. The plane crashed. How was the guy who wanted to get on the flight, how was he to know that this was the best thing that happened to him? Did not get on the flight. How could he have known that his cursing and shouting and blaming everybody in sight was completely uncalled for, because what had just happened was the best thing? And how could the father who put his daughter on the flight, how could he have known not to be proud? Because it was not the best thing that had happened to him. So what the bleep do we know? How are we supposed to decide what should happen or shouldn't happen? So we have no choice, rationally, than to trust God that anything that does happen was made to happen, and therefore intentional, therefore meaningful, and therefore necessary. When we don't see how it could possibly be necessary, that's not surprising. We have no access to the information. There's one other thing. Now, we're talking this week, we're talking about the painful things, the tragic things that come from God, from above. Next week, we'll talk about the painful things that come person to person. If a human being harms me or hurts me or whatever. But today, let's stick with God. Do we really want an explanation for why bad things happen to good people? There's a really profound, wonderful exchange Elie Wiesel had with a guy who was very distressed about the Holocaust. Of course, everybody asks Elie Wiesel, or asked Elie Wiesel, why there was a Holocaust, as if he was supposed to know because he was there. And he tells people that he has no idea. But one time, this man was really insisting, why did it happen? And Wiesel said to him, I'm sorry, but I'm not allowed to tell you. The man said, you know why there was a Holocaust, but you can't tell me? He said, that's right. And the man said, why can't you tell me? Wiesel said, because when I tell you, you'll become a Nazi. The man said, I'm Jewish. How would I become a Nazi? I'm a Jew. Listen to what Wiesel said. He said, look, you're coming to me all distressed, hurt by the tragedy of 6 million Jews losing their lives, suffering. It disturbs you that there was so much suffering and so much pain. And you're asking me why that happened, which means you want me to explain to you how a Holocaust is a necessary and good thing, so that you could sleep better at night. So imagine I give you a satisfying answer, and I say to you, you don't understand. The Holocaust happened for this and this reason, and it all makes sense. And you say, okay, good. Now I understand. Now I can sleep better. Now it doesn't bother me so much. You've become a Nazi. So when we ask, particularly about the Holocaust, why? Why was there a Holocaust? Do we really want an answer? Or is it the height of chutzpah to even try to answer? You're going to justify the death of 6 million Jews with an answer? That can't be. That mustn't be. So why haven't we found an answer to bad things happening to good people? Because we don't want an answer. We're complaining. We're not asking. We're objecting. We're saying, this is painful. This is terrible. Don't give me an answer. Don't make it sound good. I'll never accept that. So here's the key, the difference that results when we think of bad in this way. Why do bad things happen to good people is a complaint of injustice. Not fair. It's not fair. They're good people. They shouldn't be suffering like that. They shouldn't die young. The objection to injustice is very common. Kids complain about injustice. People who have no justice complain about injustice. Everybody complains about injustice. People sitting in prison for heinous crimes complain that they're not being treated well. It's an injustice. You don't need to be special. You don't need to be sensitive to be disturbed by what you think is an injustice. But what about the pain itself? What about the tragedy itself? If it were explained, would it still bother you? Or would that make it okay? To an insensitive person, if I understood why there was the pain, it wouldn't bother me at all. Walk into a maternity ward in the hospital and there are women screaming in agony, doesn't bother me because I know they're having a baby. And so, yeah, fine, they're in pain. But that's how it goes. So I'm not particularly sympathetic as a result of my explanation. A more personal example would be somebody comes to me for advice. Should I make this investment? That's just an example. I know nothing about investments. And I say, no, don't make that investment. And my friend goes ahead and makes the investment and loses a lot of money. And now he needs some help. He's in trouble. So he comes to me and asks for help. I said, oh, didn't listen to me, did you? I told you not to do it. He says, yeah, you're right. I should have listened, and I didn't. And now I'm in trouble. Can you help me out? My natural reaction would be, well, I tried to help you. I told you not to do it. He says, right, that was then, but right now I'm in trouble. Can you help me out? I said, well, next time, listen to me. You see, I have no sympathy because I know what happened. I can explain why it went wrong. I knew this was going to happen, so I have no sympathy. If it surprised me, if I thought it would work out and somehow it didn't, then it would bother me. Why? Oh, hey, that shouldn't happen. But when you fail after not listening to my advice, yeah, that should happen. Next time, take my advice. So when I think I know the problem, it kind of dissolves my sympathy, which is not nice. Not nice at all. So we can be very indifferent to a woman in labor who's having terrible pain. Yeah, we know. We understand that. It's not nice. Even when bad things happen to bad people. Oh, that makes sense. That's how it should be. But if this bad person is really suffering terribly, no sympathy. Why? Because you know that it's not an injustice. Were there no injustice, would pain bother you? Other people's pain? So the sages didn't ask, is there injustice going on in the world? They knew that there was no injustice. Every pain was meant to be. Every tragedy has a purpose and a reason. And they still complained, just as bitterly. Can't we stop the pain? So they weren't reacting to an injustice, they were reacting to a person's pain. So on the one hand, if we could explain the Holocaust, it would turn us into Nazis. And on the other hand, even if we knew the explanation, it shouldn't diminish our sympathy at all if we were really sensitive people. So when we ask, why is there suffering? It doesn't matter whether it's meant to be or not. Even if it's meant to be, you complain when something hurts, and pain hurts, and tragedy hurts. So the sages say, why do the righteous suffer? It's not bad. It's necessary suffering, justified suffering. But can't there be some other way that we can accomplish the same thing without the suffering? So what hurts? To see a person in pain. That hurts. And even when I can explain the pain, I don't like it any better. So I would still object. Now, doesn't Torah teach us, isn't it part of our belief system, that there is reward and punishment? There are people who have had the chutzpah and the insensitivity of attributing the Holocaust to the sins of the Jews of that generation. Punishment for sin. See, that makes sense. There's rhyme and there's reason. There's justice. You sin, you suffer. That is a horrible, unacceptable, and cheap way of preserving your own faith in God, a faith that isn't worth preserving. By blaming the victim, by attributing it to people's sin, you get God off the hook. But what's the value in that? God himself would prefer that you blame him and not his children. God would prefer you be angry at him on behalf of his children, rather than turn on his children in order to save God's reputation. So what about reward and punishment? If it's punishment, then it has to fit the crime. What sin is punishable by a Holocaust? None. None. It hasn't been invented. So that explanation that a Holocaust can come as a result of sin, any tragedy, the result of sin, doesn't fit. Doesn't fit. You lose your wallet. Maybe that's punishment for sin. But real tragedy? No one deserves that kind of punishment. No one. We know this because the first national tragedy that we experienced as a Jewish people was the enslavement in Egypt. For which sin were our ancestors being punished with 210 years of horrific slavery? For which sin? The 10 Commandments hadn't been given yet. There were the 7 Noahide laws, which all human beings had to live by. But which of those sins is punishable by 210 years of slavery? It's outrageous. The brothers sold Yosef into slavery, and that's why they ended up being slaves. Who ended up being slaves? The grandchildren? This is not adding up at all. So we see right from the start that suffering is not necessarily punishment for sin. If you stub your toe, it's punishment for sin. If you reach into your pocket for a key and you come up with the wrong key and you have to fish in your pocket a second time to get the right key, and that's a little frustrating, there's your punishment for sin. 200 years of slavery for your grandchildren because you sinned? Not an explanation at all. So let's get this cleared away. Suffering does not imply sin, and it does not imply punishment. The world is a difficult place, not because we sinned, but because it's the lowest of all worlds. So when we see difficulty, when we see pain and we see tragedy, our reaction has to be, we're here to fix that. We will do everything we can to minimize the pain. We will do everything we can to avoid tragedy and to turn tragedy into a celebration. By finding the silver lining, by strengthening our faith, by increasing our goodness. The darker the world gets, the more light we bring to it. We don't put out the light.
What does a person meant to do if he is falling apart under the suffering that God has placed on him? He can't seem to find the strength to overcome or to pull through.
Okay, so we've been talking really about how to respond or to understand the suffering in the world when we see others suffering. Now we have to apply it to ourselves. What about one's own pain? What about one's own tragedy? Here, we've got a completely different set of values. If I'm gracious about my own disappointments and my own failures and my own aches and pains, that makes me a noble person. If I'm gracious about other people's pain, that makes me an animal. Very, very different. So another person's suffering, another person's pain, another person's disappointment should hurt me and bother me terribly. And I shouldn't be a big person and accept it graciously. That only applies to my own pain. So if a person says, I have this pain, I'm suffering, but I understand. It's okay with me. Well, that's a huge person. We had a friend back in the early years in Minnesota. He was paralyzed from a diving accident. He was 19 when he dove into the ocean and the tide had gone out. And he very casually explained that he was a very wild kid. He was completely out of control, and that this sobered him up, and that now his life is much more meaningful. Very impressive. But imagine if he had said that about someone else who was paralyzed. That would have been so insensitive. So there is what seems to be a double standard. Somebody else's pain we cannot become comfortable with, even if we understand why it happened and what the benefits are. But it still hurts. Our own pain, if we can be bigger than it, if we can be noble about it, that's very impressive. So if you can dismiss your own pain as reasonable, or like our grandparents used to say, well, at least it's not worse than that, so I can accept it. I probably did something to deserve this. If you can say that graciously, not out of depression, yes, you're a big person. But what if you can't? What if the pain doesn't allow for graciousness? What if it really is disturbing you? Well, there are a number of responses. 3 degrees of, let's call it, maturity. Something happens that I really don't like, and I didn't expect, and it hurts, emotionally, mentally, physically, whatever. The worst response is, my life is over. My life is ruined. I will never be the same again, because my life was supposed to go off in that direction, and then something went wrong, and now it's going off in that direction, and that's not my life. That was supposed to be my life. This life I don't want. So now I have no life. Very bad reaction. Another reaction would be, I know what I want, and my life is in that direction. Now, this event that happened is pulling me or pushing me into that direction, where I won't go. I am stubborn. I am determined. I will fight this thing, and I will go in my direction. I will not go in the wrong direction. So I become tough. I become rigid. I become aggressive, and I fight it. I'm not giving up. I'm not giving in. A little better. Not much. The third reaction is the only correct reaction. And that is, if something happened and my life is going in this direction, even though I didn't intend that, this direction is now my life. This is my life. Yeah, but I wanted that life. Well, welcome to the real world. You know, it's like a guy who gets married and then says, I'm getting divorced because it's not what I thought it would be. It's not what I thought it would be. So the marriage is wrong, or you thought wrong. It's not what you thought it would be. Now you know what it really is. And reality doesn't suit you. You would rather have it go the way you thought it would be, which is wrong. Is that a Peter Pan syndrome? You don't want reality? So here's the mature reaction. The mature reaction is, what is happening to me is my life. How can that be the wrong life? And this comedian has this whole routine about how he was in a car accident and he was dying. And his life flashed before his eyes. But it was the wrong life. It was somebody else's life. It's funny, but it's not possible. You can't have somebody else's life flash in front of your eyes. You can't be living a life that isn't yours. So if this is what's happening to you, then that's your life. Okay, you didn't expect it. You thought you had it all figured out and that your life would go off to this direction. But now, welcome to reality. This is your life. And if this is your life, what are you complaining about? Live it. If it's your life, live it. So the really damaging and paralyzing attitude that makes us incapable of handling our own pain or disappointment or tragedy is because, again, we think it shouldn't have happened. It's not my life. But of course it is. It is your life. So if this is what God is putting on your plate, that constitutes your life. It wouldn't happen to you if this was not your life. Everything that happens to you is yours. It's your life. And if it's your life, why not live it? It's painful. Well, if you knew that this was your life, you would handle the pain. What's really destroying you is you won't accept this life because you don't think it's yours. It's as if you're suffering somebody else's tragedy, which would be very difficult to handle. But it's not so. You are not suffering someone else's pain. You are not suffering somebody else's tragedy. You're not living somebody else's life. This is your life. So just like you can't be married to the wrong person, you can't be having somebody else's children, you can't be living somebody else's life. It doesn't work that way. So the first thing is, own it. Whatever is happening to you is you. Own it. And when it's yours, you'll find strength and you'll find ways and you'll make it work because it's your life. So you will live it. The other thing, as we said right in the beginning, you have to think of it as pneumonia. This depressing, overwhelming heaviness that you're feeling is like pneumonia. It's an illness. It's not scary. You just got to take the right antibiotic and you'll be fine. So when it comes to emotional pain, which is over the top, it also needs a remedy. It needs fixing. So if you see it that way, you don't panic. You're not overwhelmed by the overwhelming heaviness of the experience. And even if it's been going on for many years, just endless pain and suffering. If it's been going on for many years, then you have been going on for many years, which means you are handling it. Which means you have some reservoir of strength, some secret knowledge that is keeping you going that the people around you don't understand. So give yourself a little credit for that. Give God a little credit for giving you that strength to handle the burden or the challenge that he's putting you through. It's really impressive, not depressing, when you see a person continue living a productive and moral life when they have so many good reasons to give it all up and quit. Really impressive. And you have to wonder, where are they getting the strength from? It's like this woman who says, I just can't take it. I can't take it. I can't live like this for even a moment. I said, you said that to me 10 years ago. 10 years ago, you thought you couldn't do it for another minute. And here you are. Next week, we need to talk about the one thing that is bad. Because having defined the word bad as that which should not happen, and therefore cannot happen in God's world, there's one thing left to be explained. If nothing bad ever happened and cannot happen, Why does the word exist in the Torah? The Torah calls many things bad. And you should eliminate the bad in your midst, from your midst. There is one thing that is bad, and that is our choice. Human beings have freedom of choice. Freedom of choice means you can choose what you should not have chosen. You can make the wrong choice. If I can make the wrong choice and I choose to harm you, then wouldn't the harm that you experience be wrong? Should not have happened. I shouldn't have chosen to hurt you, and therefore you should not have been hurt. So we're back to the original problem. Can a bad thing happen to a person? The brief answer, which we'll develop next week, the brief answer is, I can have a bad choice. The result cannot be bad. In other words, my freedom does not include your pain. So I am not free to hurt you. I'm only free to choose to hurt you. That's why it's called freedom of choice, not freedom of action. We'll develop that next week. We also need to talk about how do we turn the pain into something productive? Because that's really the only really good response. How do you do that? It's not enough to suffer silently, to bite your tongue and go on suffering. That's not good. Every pain has to produce an increase in life. Every tragedy has to make us appreciate life more and live it more fully. How do we do that? How do you turn the darkness into light, the bitter into sweet, the agony into ecstasy? How do we do that? If we learn to do that, we have basically mastered the art of living. That's what we need to talk about next week, which becomes a little more practical, a little takeaway to-do list. What do we do to not only survive the pain, but actually thrive on it?
Thank you very much, Rabbi Friedman, and thank you very much everyone that joined in to participate in this course. Please do remember that next week, this time, will be the third and final part of this course. Please be sure to send in your questions that you'd like Rabbi Friedman to address, so that we make sure that all questions are addressed properly with enough time to do so. Until then, may we only have good news to share. Sei gesund, Hatzlacha Rabba.